Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I have here with me Henri Cole, and Henri was born in Fukuoka, Japan in 1956. He has published over half a dozen previous collections of poetry, including Touch, Pierce the Skin, Nothing to Declare, and Blackbird and Wolf, as well as a memoir. Orphic Paris. Among his many awards are the Jackson Poetry Prize, the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, the Rome Prize, the Berlin Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize. He lives in Boston, where he is a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, and he teaches at Claremont McKenna College. His latest book of poetry, Blizzard, is available now. You can connect with Henri on his website at henricole.com. So first of all, Henri, I wanted to say thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us. You were telling me before we came on that actually you had to postpone a class to do this, so that means a lot that you took the time.
You're welcome. I hope some of my students are there. I'm going to meet with them on Saturday instead. It's just already our second week of school, so I should correct one thing you said, which is that I was a fellow at Radcliffe, but that was about 5 years ago. So I've been teaching for the last 5 years, but before that I was a fellow at Radcliffe. So that I just want to set the record straight. So
absolutely. So I guess the first question is, tell us a little bit about Blizzard. What inspired it? What made you want to write it now? Why is this the time for Blizzard?
Well, maybe first I'll say about the title that Blizzard is not really a weather event. I was thinking more of just an overwhelming rush of feeling, or a deluge of feeling that the book contains. I don't really write assignment books or project books. These are poems that I've written over the last 5 or 6 years. So they are a kind of record of my life over the last 5 or 6 years. They're arranged in a meaningful way. I would say the middle section of the book speaks to the historical moment in which we're living most avidly. The final section of the book is there were sort of more poems of selfhood. And the first section of the book is kind of more of a miscellany with nature poems of one sort or another. They speak to multiple subjects.
That makes complete sense to me. I was curious because one of the poems in this, I want to say the third section, is actually called Blizzard as well.
Oh dear, someone is leaving a message. Sorry, I didn't think about that.
It happens all the time. It's totally okay. I think I still have you there. Did I maybe lose you? Henri, can you hear me? Well, seems I might have lost him for a second there. I hope that he can hear me, because unfortunately I cannot hear him. That's okay though. We will sit here for a minute. Oh, there you are. Henri, can you hear me?
There you are. Oh, see, that phone call messed things up. I'm sorry.
No, it's completely fine. So as I was asking, one of the poems, I want to say it was in the third section of the book, is called Blizzard, and I was curious if there was any relation between that poem and the title of the book itself. If that poem was supposed to be reflective of the idea of a deluge, or if that was supposed to be a kind of a microcosm of the book itself, or if they're completely unrelated?
I think I made it the title just because I would say that it isn't the most important poem in the book. I'm proud of that poem, but it's the title that I felt embodied the spirit of the book more than the poem itself. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Like I said, it just I when I'm reading it and I go, oh, this is the same as the name of the book. I wondered what the link could be. So your poetry is incredibly accessible, and also you can feel the emotional gravitas behind it. And as someone who, at times, myself, I felt, often intimidated by poetry, concerned I wasn't going to get it, concerned I would feel foolish for not understanding it. Yours felt very approachable to me. So what's your process like? Is that an intentional thing that you do by design, or is it just a natural outcropping of sort of what you create?
Well, I think accessibility can be overrated. I don't know that I think that's necessarily a good thing. There are some very accessible, not so good poets around. So I think I want the poems to be accessible sentence by sentence, but I want them to have a kind of psychological complexity that is in counterpoint to the seeming direct, the kind of sharp directness of the sentences. That's my sort of strategy. That's a style I've arrived at over many years. I didn't begin that way. I was a much more sort of descriptive and clotted language. My language was much more full, you might say, even Baroque in some way occasionally. But about 15 years ago, I really kind of rejected that style and began moving in a different direction.
So it sounds like for you, the creative process is very much a choice. You had a style, you chose to move away from it and embrace a different kind of style. When you sit down to write, is it also a choice, or is it something that you see out in the world, whether it be something that you see naturally occurring or something happening in the greater world at large that makes you feel a certain way and you go, oh my gosh, I have to write this? What's that process like?
Well, very occasionally there is inspiration, but I have to say I think that's really the rare occurrence. Most of it is just hard work. Hard work and not getting frustrated and keeping going, even in the face of, silence. I do usually begin with some kind of seed. Occasionally I do want to write about something, but the aboutness is not so important to me as the interesting language of saying things, seeming to say something in an original way. That's sort of more exciting to me than recording events.
No, that makes sense. It's about the language more so than it is sometimes about the subject, and I can understand that, I think.
Yes, I think when you reduce a poem to its subject, you've done the most superficial thing you can do with it. You can say the subject in a few words. You can say this is a poem about blah blah blah. And so let's get that out of the way, and let's talk about why it works then. What is it about, the language here, the organization, the form, so many other things that makes it art. Obviously, though, a poem does have to be about something, I feel. A poem has to have some kind of primary feeling in it. I do believe that it can be fear or grief or desperation or joy or triumph. It can be many things, but it has to be something. It can't be just an acrobatic performance of language, in my view.
I think that's a really important line to tread as well, then, because there are definitely things that I've read that I went, wow, this is beautiful, but what does it say? And I sort of go, I think it says that whoever wrote this was very clever and they made something very beautiful, but I don't know what else it's trying to convey at the same time. So I think that's an important piece of it as well. We've got a question from our live chat from Chris. And Chris,
okay. So we can live chat while we're chatting.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what are we doing if it's not live chat?
Yes.
We're live chatting too, aren't we?
Exactly. So Chris,
these words amuse me. That's all.
No. It is interesting. You and I are chatting live. This is a live chat, and yet at the same time, the text screen on the side of my screen here is considered the quote unquote live chat, which is not live. It's actually someone types it and they think about it and then they wait for me to see it. It is a very strange world we live in.
Yes. I can't see any of that, so people should know that. Maybe people should know. I don't know who's listening. I don't see any names. All I see is my face. That's good for people to know because they might want me to know they're here.
Good point. So, if anyone is here and they want Henri to know that they are watching, please post a comment in the live chat, and I will let him know because I am the only one who can see that.
Okay.
So, Chris's question: who/what was Henri's biggest inspiration for his writing style?
Oh, well. That's a hard question. I think of myself as, kind of being, kind of fertilized by a bunch of poets. From Hopkins to Elizabeth Bishop to James Merrill to Tom Gunn to there are just so many. It's hard to name one. Robert Lowell, certainly in terms of the sonnet and sort of post-Freudian autobiographical content.
Okay, so it's not a single person, which I think would make sense. It would be very strange if you went, nope, it's this person right here. They are. My style is descended from them because you built your own style, your own sort of unique way of translating all this to us.
Yes, I mean, I think that's just the way it was for me. I'm not judging those who are influenced by one single person or one single school or aesthetic. But I do think of myself as being a hybrid of many things, of many different styles.
So, what are some styles then that you, in particular, enjoy for yourself? When you want to read poetry, when you want to read something and feel a certain way, what are the styles that appeal to you?
Well, it's not really a question of style. I don't think of it that way. I think every good poem has to have two things. It has to have some interesting orchestration of language, and it has to have primary feeling, as I was speaking about. And it seems to me there is a lot of American poetry that is about orchestration, and then maybe there's also a lot that is about a record of primary feeling. But I'm in the middle, and for me, a poem must have both things going on, and I'm always trying to work out a kind of fresh equation for accomplishing those two things.
So, what to you then would be the perfect ratio? What's not to get you to tell us all the secret formula, but what would be the right ratio then?
Oh, I don't know. I would say they're of equal importance. I would say 50%, 50%. Yeah, I would say they're of equal importance to me.
Okay. So my next question is a little more, since I feel like we've veered onto the topic of poetry in general, which is very interesting to me. This next question was one that was emailed in, and I'll read the question, and they asked Magpie was the email, so I'm not going to say their name, so Magpie, whomever you are, this is your question. When talking to someone who is not as familiar with poetry, what would you recommend that they do to begin to appreciate the scope of the art? What things should you look for in terms of how to designate good poetry from bad? Is it always important to identify good poetry from bad, or should you just be able to enjoy it? When reading poetry, is it more important to have empathy or imagination as far as understanding the imagery presented?
Well, I don't think you should have to choose between empathy and imagination. There's no really good poetry without either of those things. Empathy is the most important human quality, I think. And without imaginations, we can't write poetry. When poetry disappears, it will be a sign that our imaginations have gone. I think in terms of getting someone started, it's just a question of reading, of choosing a good poet, and reading all of their work. It's really like learning a language. It's not like, going to Berlin and learning, some phrases to speak German for 4 days and then going home and forgetting about it all. No, it's a whole language of that you learn when you read the whole body of someone's work, and you will then figure out which poems you like and which poems you like most, which you don't respond to, and why. I love this because this speaks to me because these 3 reasons. And then by reading someone like Elizabeth Bishop, to choose someone out of the blue, then you might read Robert Lowell, or then you might read James Merrill, and you would do with them the same thing you did with Bishop. You would begin to read all of their poems or all of their books. A sense of an individual author's individual books is very meaningful. I wouldn't recommend just going to a website and reading 3 poems and rejecting someone because those 3 poems on the website have no resonance for you. I would say that's not enough. I encourage you to look at the book and the art of a bookmaking, and how poems are arranged in a collection, and where that book comes in their life, and how they changed after that. All of those things are meaningful.
So how did the writing of Blizzard change and impact your life then? I mean, you spoke a little bit about how the different sections of the book are different pieces of it, are different pieces of what you were conveying. But, you know, if creating it changed you, how did it? What was the change it made?
You know, I feel a little bit, Drew, like that's easier for someone on the outside to evaluate than it is for me on the inside to evaluate. You know, people may say to me, "This is your best book, Henri," or "This book is so different." And you know, from my side, it's a reflection of the person I am now, and have been for the last 5 or 6 years, and that probably has evolved and changed from the last book. But it's hard, you know, when you're writing poems, you're in this total close focus mode. You're like a microscope, you might say. And very rarely do I do this sort of satellite thing and say, I am a poet that did this and this and this, and now I'm a poet that's going to do this and this and this. You know, it's a much more subtle inward process, you know, that includes a certain amount of failure, I would say. So, you know, I was aware of it's my 10th book. You know, one is aware of not wanting to repeat oneself, certainly. On the other hand, perhaps that's an impossible thing not to do. You know, I make sentences in a certain way, and I'm not sure the way I make sentences has changed that much. Mm-hmm. But others might disagree, and I would love to talk to them about that, actually.
So it sounds like it's, and I can understand that. Obviously, it's very hard for people to see the changes or the growth or the differences in themselves over time, because you're with yourself all day, every day, and these processes are gradual. And so it's difficult to go and say, yes, over the last 10 years I've changed in the following ways. So I can certainly understand.
Yes, I would actually be wary of anyone that makes too many claims about their own selves. Tell you the truth. But.
Beware someone who talks about their own wisdom. Oh, I've grown so much more wise over the years. Oh, I'm sure you have.
Well, that among other things. But.
So, 3 poems of yours that I particularly enjoyed were Doves, Blizzard, Goya, and Weeping Cherry. And I think, for me, obviously, the world is very difficult right now. It's a tough place. There's a lot to be frustrated by and upset by and hurt by and scared of. And I felt, and I mean, maybe I wasn't getting it the right way, but I felt a level of just frustration and relief almost. Like there is this sense of, you know, there's all this building up of stress, especially in Goya, and then just sort of this once it's done, it's done. Was that something? Well, I guess first of all, am I getting it? I guess this is the first question, or am I interpreting my own thing with that?
You're speaking particularly about the poem Goya now?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I think that poem kind of rides on its ending. You know, it's a poem about seeing a bunch of Goya paintings. I guess I was in Madrid, and the horror of those paintings, of what is present in those paintings, and then going out on the street and looking at one's hands and imagining oneself being culpable or capable of the same kind of horror. That's what I was trying to do in that poem. Mm-hmm. The last image is looking at my hands and remembering them. Here, let me read. I can read certainly a line without
I think we can get away
breaking
with that.
Copyright issues. I'm standing against a wall and I'm taking the measure of my own hands. Its lustrous, hairy knuckles dinged from grinding meat. So, I'm imagining myself having prepared a meal and ground meat, and that my hands look like, not so unlike those hands that were in the images in those terrifying Goya paintings. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of rejecting an idea of myself as a virtuous narrator, that's not capable of the same kind of
brutality or violence, right?
Yes, exactly. That was the idea.
Okay. And I think that first of all, that makes complete sense. As soon as you started explaining where that came from for you, I completely got it. And I think that there's something very universal about that. We all sort of divorce ourselves from horrible things that are out there, but that I wouldn't do because I'm, my hands are clean, so to speak. And the understanding that all of us can be capable of those kinds of acts, I think is a really interesting thing to explore. So then, in a similar sense, what was going on with Weeping Cherry? If Goya was inspired by Goya's paintings and seeing them and feeling a level of connection with mankind's ability to and propensity at times for violence, what was the same story? What was the story with Weeping Cherry?
Well, the Weeping Cherry really tells the story of my mother's people. My mother was born a French woman in Marseille, but her parents were from Asia Minor or Armenia, and during the early part of the last century, there was a kind of pogrom of the Armenians, and mm-hmm. a ship came along of kind of famous ship captain, saved a lot of people and brought them to the port. A lot of these Armenians, my grandmother's first husband died, but she came with a second husband and one child to the port of Marseille, and began a new life there as a French immigrant, you might say. That poem really tells the story of the Armenian people in Asia Minor and their destiny, their violent destiny.
Mm-hmm. The Armenian genocide is such an interesting piece of history, and it's something that we often don't talk about, especially here in the United States. It's something that isn't as well known, and I think that that's an absolute shame. As a historian, which is what I was in a former life anyway, it was always so heartbreaking to understand that happened and to see the world sort of ignoring it, I guess. It always bothered me very much that was not something that was more on the forefront of conversation when discussing the 20th century, especially because of the seeds that it lays for future horrible actions that are going to happen. I mean, in particular in Europe, but also you can say in different parts of the world as well. And in a weird way, it's almost a tale as old as time. People, trying to destroy the other. So, now I have to reread that with that different lens. I
think there was an action by Congress a couple years ago acknowledging
really
the genocide.
Really, wow.
But it was sort of, I think it was sort of thrown out by Trump, to tell you the truth.
Sure.
And, well, that was the end of that for now.
Yeah.
But
I honestly didn't realize that there was any sort of resolution from Congress. I know that it's been brought forward a number of times, and that due to, I'm using very big air quotes here, geopolitical issues, mainly a relationship with Turkey,
exactly.
it has never gotten further. So the fact that there was at some point some resolution is really, really interesting. And of course, it would change now, but it makes me happy to hear that at one point in our not too distant past there was something, because I remember when I learned about it as a child, and then later learned that my country didn't recognize that as a genocide and didn't take issue with it. It really very much bothered me. It was a very disillusioning kind of moment for me. So I hope that, I'm glad that there was some movement there, I guess.
Yes, there was.
So it's interesting. In both the poems that we just talked about, I had one very different takeaway than the intent. And I'm curious, in your opinion, is it better that I, as someone who's reading the poetry, gets to talk with and understand the story behind the poem so I get the full meaning? Or is it okay enough that I derive my own meaning, or does it not really matter?
Well, probably everybody would answer that question differently. I believe in authorial intent. I do have an intention when I write the poem, but it's probably unfair for me to expect that every reader would get the same experience. So you bring to the poem all the experiences of your own reading and your own life, and take something, maybe some of what I intended, and mix it with, whatever you're bringing to the poem, and go away with something else. And, I acknowledge that as well. Mm-hmm. But it's not like it's all up for grabs. I don't believe that. I want my reader to be moved in the same ways that I was moved to write the poem. But I'm not. I can't control every part of that reading experience. It's gratifying enough to have the circle completed. When you write a poem in solitude at a table, disconnected from, those you love, disconnected from everybody, mm-hmm. And then it should find its way out into the world and be put into a book, and then be sold in a bookstore, and then be taken home, and then be brought into lamplight in the privacy of someone's life, and then read and experienced. That seems to me miraculous. So I'm pretty satisfied with that act alone.
Well,
so
I think you bring up a good point about authorial intent, because obviously you've created something that is to some extent a little collaborative, because obviously I read it and I bring my experiences to the table, like you said. But I do think it's important that you had a vision and a set of feelings you had that you brought to this, and I think that it is important that those also be understood as well. But we have another question from our live chat.
May I just say one more thing,
yes,
though?
Of course,
I think in terms of that poem, Weeping Cherry, it's not, I wanted it, the story of the people building a life and flourishing, and then a small disagreement leading to violence, leading to a pogrom. I wanted that to be kind of not particular. I wanted it to have a kind of allegorical cast that suggested it was the story in mankind that is repeated again and again and again, which is why I didn't particularize it with the Turks and the Armenians. Mm-hmm. But I did bring it in the end, in the last part. I mean, my mother had just died, and so that's why I was reflecting on that. And so I do bring it to a culmination in the life of my mother at the end of the poem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got another question from our live chat. This one is, Henri, do you have a go-to strategy when sitting down to start writing, or does it vary depending on what you're working on?
Well, I get asked this a lot. I often sit down, with zero, with nothing. Because I've been teaching full-time, say, or traveling and unable to focus in this way. So I have a bag of sort of prompts, you might say, mm-hmm. of articles, of scraps of paper with phrases on them, and hundreds and hundreds of bits of paper. And I begin to sort of leaf through them looking for a spark, something that speaks to me in my state of feeling zeroed out. And eventually, I might spread things around, and eventually something does speak to me. And I'll write a few lines connected to it, and then, it's like, it's like putting a seed in the earth and nurturing it. All the seeds don't come to fruition, but all you can do is try. So that's sort of my go-to way. Once I get in a groove, once I get in a good writing groove, the how to get started thing is not so much a problem, because I don't know, it's like all cylinders are going. But, but getting the engine up and running can be hard.
When you're faced with...
Do we know who asked that question?
Yes, we do. That one was Chris. Chris asked that question.
Oh, so Chris asked the first one, too.
Yes,
Chris has
he did.
Some questions, yeah.
Yes, he has. When you're faced with that difficulty kind of getting started or getting the engine moving, how do you work through that? How do you work through not just writer's block, but I get almost poet's block? How do you do that?
Oh, just not throwing in the towel. Most of my poetry writing I do in France, in truth. Mm-hmm. So I do it every morning, and I usually go for 7 hours, 6-7 hours. I just persevere. I don't get up and say I'm going to go, walk to the Arc de Triomphe. I don't do that till 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But from when I get up till 3 or 4 in the afternoon, I have to sit there. I write on the sofa there with all these papers spread around me, and there is something about having another language swirl around me that insulates me and allows me to go deeper in a way. Mm-hmm. I find that helps me. But there's a part, Drew, I've been writing since I was 23, let's say 22. That's now 42 years ago. Is that right? That's kind of shocking to me. There's a part of the process that I acknowledge as mysterious, maybe even magical, a lot of it is ardor, mm-hmm. but some of it is magic, I think, or maybe magic is the wrong word. It's just unknowable. Some of it is unknowable. Why things come when they come and why there's nothing when there's nothing,
Sure. It makes sense that part of it would be, unknowable. It is an art form, so there's going to be an element of the mystical to it, I think. So what advice then would you give to someone who is just starting out writing poetry, or someone who's written things before but they want to explore and expand beyond writing a couple of rhyming couplets, which of course there's nothing wrong with. If that's what someone's working on, it's much better than I can do. But how do you progress? How do you grow? How do you get started?
Well, I think reading influences me more than anything. Reading, sleep. I like to sleep. I think sleep affects my concentration, and without sleep, I can't concentrate or write anything. I like to listen to other people's opinions. In France, I have a French friend, a kind of elderly French friend who tells me what she thinks with no pretty language. And, that's a part of my process in a way. I would say don't be afraid of, it's not yourself that's being criticized. It's a bunch of words on the page that is being criticized. And why just keep yourself out of that equation and make the best poem you can. I have to say that to my students all the time. But on the other hand, after many years, one is pierced when one receives harsh criticism. There's no stopping that. So, but I think reading is like putting, I like new information. New information nurtures me at my desk, and so I travel. Travel is a way of bringing new information into the river, you might say, the river of language at the desk. Mm-hmm. Reading, travel, living life, gardening, planting things in the earth and seeing them grow, raising children, having love, falling in love. All these things, I think, are necessary, actually.
Okay. So it would be fair to say that the best teacher of poetry is experiencing life itself and all the different pieces of it.
Yes, yeah, I would say that's true. I've often found having to push against something to be a help, and living in a time of extreme coarseness, when there are these voices of politicians and dictators and newspapers and radios all around one, trying to find a voice that is different from all of that is is a wonderful exercise.
Yeah, I can see it's almost like that's the gristle in the mill, so to speak. It's the adjutant. We have another question. This one is from Leanna Jacobs, and Leanna wants to know: in the final line or stanza of a poem, how do you wish to leave the reader feeling? Do you wish to keep them wondering, or grant them a clear yet implicit understanding of what your piece was about?
Thank you, Leanna. I don't think it's a responsibility of art to be warm and cuddly.
Okay.
I think art can do something very different than that, and it can do the opposite of that. It can wake you up to the horror that surrounds you, or surrounds us. I think different poems, I couldn't say that there's one way I want to leave the reader. I would like to leave the reader feeling that there's an intelligent person that wrote this poem, that I could trust. I think I want the poems to have a feeling of like a candle burning for truth in them, and I want the reader to believe the poem is true in some way. Maybe that's the most important thing, but I also want them to hear language singing. That's not something you get just at the end. Maybe that's what you get from a total experience.
So it's a bit of both. It sounds like the answer is a little bit of both, maybe.
Yes, I like that. A little bit of both. That's so much easier than what I said.
But it makes sense though. I think that trying to define it, any answer, anything with art is just one singular thing. I don't know that that's terribly easy to do. So it makes sense that everything is a little mixed. So we are coming up on the 50-minute mark, and I try not to keep people with me for too long because I know, especially you are a busy guy. You're teaching, which is spectacular, by the way, especially in today's world. Anyone who is a teacher is a saint of a human being, because the only thing that's going to make this world better is better educated people. So,
well, that's certainly true. That's certainly true.
So I want to end it with a last question.
Doesn't Chris have one more question for me?
Well, let's. You know what? I'll tell you what, Chris. If you have another question, you can be the last question. You have until if you're listening here, you have until I get the answer to my question, and then you can ask your final one.
I think I know who that Chris is. So.
Oh, you do?
That's why.
Well, good. All right. So, my final question is this. Obviously, with all of the turmoil going on, that's going to be a fertile soil, to keep with the seed metaphor from earlier, for the works that you're creating. Do you find that calm waters can lead to the same kind of thing? Hopefully when the world is a little better, a little nicer, a little kinder, will we still get poetry from you? Are we still going to get, beautiful
Of
words?
course. No. I remember back after 9/11, and there were many poems written about 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
But the poems that moved me most were poems that just described the ocean surf, or that didn't have any turmoil in them at all. Well, I suppose the ocean surf does have turmoil, but it was writing about the earth, in which there was no human conflict, you might say. Mm-hmm. So absolutely. I think one of the functions of poetry of lyric poetry is solace, and another function is to push against power.
Sure.
But another is solace, and solace in the beauty of the earth is very much a part of American poetry.
That's first of all, it's a happy answer to hear, because it's always nice to know that, it's not just that conflict breeds beauty, but that it can be quiet beauty as well. And just so you know, our Chris did come through with one last question. So, Henri, what advice would you give to young poets looking to find their style and voice?
Oh, well, I would say, I went to Columbia. I got an MFA at Columbia, and there was lots that was wrong with that writing program, but one of the things that was right was that they exposed me to a lot of different sensibilities. And I would encourage every younger poet to do the same thing, to read widely across taste and across decades and across, national borders, mm-hmm. and just be exposed to as much as possible. And all of that will, over a period of years, be synthesized into something of your own. It took me until I was in my 30s, late 30s, to really begin to process the really strong personalities I've been exposed to. Great poets. I'm not criticizing them, but I was just completely unformed myself, and so I would say expose yourself to as much as possible. Don't go down one aesthetic path because it seems to be the fashion of the moment. That's the biggest danger, I think, for a young poet.
Sure, getting caught up in a specific popular style as opposed to developing their own. That makes sense.
The wagon will go past and leave you in the desert.
So, Henri, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us this evening. If you'll allow me, I'm going to shamelessly plug for just a moment. You can find Henri's book, Blizzard, at Town Book Center, which is in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. If you are not in Pennsylvania, if you are in, for example, California or Massachusetts or anywhere else in the United States, you can also find this on our website, which is townbc.com. It's TOWNEBC.com, and we'll be happy to send it to you. So again, Henri, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Drew. Good luck to you with your work.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. It was a lot of fun. And we will see you guys next time.